Hello and welcome to another episode of Reason at Large. I'm Craig Biddle. Today I want to discuss a question that came in from Nick about morality. He asks, can there be objective morality without God? Can morality be both secular and absolute? The one-word answer is absolutely. Yes, this is a great question, and it's going to be a rich answer. Not only can there be an absolute morality without God, but that's the only way there can be an absolute morality. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the video. But to get started, let's just focus first on what morality is and why we need it. So what is this thing we call morality? Morality is simply a code of principles and values to guide our choices and actions. So that we know what to do in life, how to act. Now, why do we need this? Why not just do whatever we want to do without any principled guidance? And the answer to this is that human beings are not born knowing what to do in life. We don't have innate knowledge about how to live and how to survive and how to prosper. Other animals are born with some degree of innate knowledge, with some degree of instinct. They know which foods are edible for them and how to build their own shelters or find shelter, and which other animals to avoid and the like. Human beings don't have any of that knowledge when we're born, and we don't acquire it automatically. Human beings have a different means of survival than instinct. We survive by means of reason, by looking out at reality using our five senses and by integrating the things that we perceive into concepts and generalizations and principles and forming ultimately principles of action about what we should do and how we should act. To the extent that our principles of action are good, that to the extent that they correspond to the requirements of our lives, we are able to live and achieve happiness. To the extent that either we don't form those principles at all, or we form them improperly, we can't. And so, and this is the reason that there are a lot of people who live very poor lives, because they don't have principled guidance to help them figure out what to do. We're simply not born with it, and it does not come around automatically. Part and parcel of the faculty of reason, which is our distinctive means of survival, is the faculty of volition. Reason works by means of choice. We can choose to focus on reality and think and activate our mind and figure things out, or we can choose not to. We can just drift or simply actually evade, turn away from facts. So one of the things that a proper morality tells us to do is to use our distinctive means of living and our means of knowledge, reason. And then it goes on to help us by means of other principles, telling us how to produce and acquire and keep the various things that we need in order to live and prosper. Now, I'll say a few words in a minute about the kinds of things we need and the kinds of actions that we need to take. But let me get one fundamental issue sort of out of the way here, and that is why life? Why is life the goal here? Why should we go after that which is good for our lives, that which is necessary for us to live and prosper? I've sort of assumed that from the beginning here. And the answer to this is rather complex, but the sort of essentialized version of it, and this is Ayn Rand's discovery, is that life is the only thing that gives rise to the possibility of values. We can't pursue values unless we're alive. And remaining alive is the only goal that necessitates the achievement and the the achievement and the keeping of values. We don't need to pursue and keep values unless we want to live, unless we want to continue living and prosper. So life is what gives rise to both the possibility and the need of values. Without life, if you just take life out of the picture, the goal of life, we don't need values at all. There's no point in going after them, and you certainly don't need a code of values. You don't need a moral code if you don't want to live. And it's literally, in a sense, this simple. Either we need a code of values to guide our choices and actions, or we don't. Well, if we do need them, there must be a reason why we need them. What is that reason? Either we want to live and achieve happiness, or we don't. And if we don't, we just don't need any guidance at all. There's no middle ground. You either need the values for something, or you don't. And the only ultimate end is life. Now, Ayn Rand goes much deeper into the justification of this principle that life is the standard of value, and she ultimately points out that there are really only two alternatives in the universe, two fundamental alternatives in the universe, and that is existence or non-existence, and this alternative is faced only by living things. Non-living things can't actually go out of existence. They can change forms. You can take a rock and smash it into little bits, but you can't make it go out of existence. Life can actually go out of existence. The chemical elements of a living thing can remain in existence when the life of the thing goes out of existence. But it's ultimately this fundamental alternative of existence or non-existence that is faced only by living things that is the fact that anchors this principle in perceptual reality. We need values only in order to live. There's no other purpose for them. So life is really the standard of value, and life and a lifetime of happiness, which is the life proper to a human being. I mean, there's no point in being alive and being miserable. So a lifetime of happiness is the goal. And there are factual requirements of human life and happiness. It's not the case that we can live however we want. If you pick the wrong berries and eat them, you will die. If you don't build a sufficient shelter and a storm comes, you will die. If you don't identify the dangerous animals and keep your distance from them, you will die, and so on. And all the more so when it comes to failing to identify dangerous people and dangerous governments and things like that. So we need to know what the requirements of our life are, and we need to codify those requirements in values and then in principled actions, which are called virtues. And that is where a secular absolute morality comes from. It comes from observation and logic based on the requirements of human life. Now, some of the values that are requirements of human life include, and I'll start with the most fundamental. I've already mentioned it. It's reason. It's our basic means of living. Reason is our means of knowledge. It's what enables us to understand the world and our needs, and to make causal connections, and to form principles, and figure out what to do in this world. So reason, our faculty for perceiving reality and integrating that which we perceive and forming concepts and using logic, that's our basic means of survival, and thus our basic moral value, our basic life-serving value. And then the use of reason, thinking and applying reason, that's an action. That is the basic virtue, the virtue that Ayn Rand called the virtue of rationality. So a value is something we need, and the virtue is an action that we take in light of the things that we need. So reason is both a value and, when applied, a virtue, and that's really the fundamental. Now, what are the other things that we absolutely need? Well, there are many things that we need to acquire. I mean, we need food, clothing, shelter, medical care. We need self-esteem. We need friendship. We need romance. We need freedom. So we can act on our judgment, so that we can live. There are a lot of things that we need, and reason is the means of identifying and gaining those things. Now, other virtues include, for instance, honesty, which is the virtue of refusing to pretend that facts are other than they are. Now, this doesn't mean you can't fantasize or read fiction. It means that you can't in earnest, pretend that reality is something other than it is, because you can't live if you do that. I mean, if just a simple common sense version of this is, if you're eating a really crappy diet that's detrimental to your health, and you pretend that you're not doing that, it's gonna catch up with you, and it's gonna harm you. Reality is an absolute, and so our thinking and our virtues, our moral principles, have to correspond to the actual requirements of our life. And there are many, and they're quite rich. So, you know, I'm only giving a very quick version of what secular morality consists of. But so there you have two virtues. You have rationality and honesty. You have to go by reason, and you can't pretend that facts are other than they are. If you do, it will catch up with you. Another virtue that's absolutely necessary to human life is productivity. Being productive, or what Ayn Rand called productiveness. This is the act of transforming material values, or I should say raw materials in this world, into material values that we need in order to live. Now, you can produce either goods or services. If you produce services, you can trade them for goods, but ultimately we need goods in order to live, so we have to produce them. We have to produce either goods themselves, or we have to produce something that we can trade for the goods that we need in order to live. So productiveness is another virtue. If we don't produce, we simply can't live. Now, if we live parasitically on others who produce, if people produce and we mooch off of them, you know, granted, we could stay alive, but that's not living a human life. A human life is a life guided by one's own judgment, and that involves producing the values that one needs in order to sustain one's life. So productiveness is a virtue. Another fundamental virtue is independence, or independent thinking. You know, the truth is not whatever the general consensus says it is, or what other people say it is. So we can't just turn to other people to figure out what is true. We can't say, well, what do you think is true, and just go by that, or what do you think I should value, and just go by that. We have to use our own minds. Our own minds are our means of knowledge. This is sort of a restatement of the fact that reason is our means of knowledge, but it's a restatement in light of the fact that we do have the alternative of turning to other people and just pretending like they can tell us what's true. But they can't. I mean, you know, they can say it, but we can't rely on that, because people can be wrong. And so we need to look at reality for ourselves. We need to use our own perception and our own use of logic to arrive at conclusions. And, you know, if we find out that we're mistaken about a conclusion, then we use reason again and correct it over time. But there's only one way we can acquire knowledge, and that is by means of our own observations and logic. So independence, independent thinking, is a virtue. It's something we absolutely must do in order to live and prosper. Another virtue that is an absolute necessity is the virtue of justice. We have to judge people rationally and treat them accordingly, because if we don't, we wind up with all sorts of horrific relationships, both on a personal level and on a social, political level. People can be wonderful. They can add great value to our lives. We can trade with them. We can have friendships with them. We can get a lot out of other people. We can learn from them, all sorts of things. But they can also be the most dangerous thing in the world. I mean, you know, people can aim to harm us. They can aim to kill us. They can form, you know, mobs and governments that can, you know, massacre, or create whole holocausts. I mean, there's nothing more dangerous than people who choose to be dangerous. So we need to act with respect to this fact of reality, the fact that people have free will. They can choose to be good or bad or anywhere in between. And we have to know what the people, or what kind of people we're dealing with in life. So we have to judge people based on the actual facts. We have to look at them, figure out whether they're good or bad, whether they face reality, basically whether they uphold the virtues. Do they go by reason? Are they independent thinkers? Are they honest? And so forth. If they are, then they're good for our lives, or at least potentially good for our lives. If they're not honest, if they don't go by reason, if they don't think for themselves, then they're potentially very dangerous. So we certainly don't want to be involved in relationships with them, not personal relationships like, friendships or romance or business relationships. And we don't want them in office. We don't want them in political positions of political power, whereby they can, wield force against us. So the virtue of justice is another, essential virtue of human life. Now, there are several more, virtues and lots of elaborations on these principles, but this gives you an idea of how it is we derive moral principles, absolute moral principles, from the perceptual facts of reality simply using reason. Now, there's a lot more to this, and I recommend highly that if you're interested in secular morality, and there's only reason to be, because you need it in order to live, read Ayn Rand's book, The Virtue of Selfishness, which is where she first laid out the principles of her secular morality, rational egoism. And read my book, Loving Life, The Morality of Self-Interest and the Facts That Support It, which is a systematic presentation of Ayn Rand's ideas. Of course, my own presentation, but nevertheless based on her ideas. And either of those books or both of those books will give you a good idea of what the essence of secular morality is. Now, that said, I want to return to the issue of God for a minute. It's actually impossible for there to be an absolute morality if God is in the picture in some way. Now, to begin with, God doesn't even exist. It's just a fantasy. But the idea of God is that there's this consciousness, this omnipotent, omnipresent, all-knowing consciousness that created the universe and that created man and that created moral law, and we're supposed to have faith that he exists and then obey him no matter what. And so the classic example of this is in the Bible when God tells Abraham to kill his son Isaac to see whether Abraham would obey God, because that's the number one virtue according to religion. And Abraham, raises the knife and he's getting ready to kill his son, and then God intervenes and says, "No, I was just checking to see that you were, virtuous, that you were going to obey me." And I mean, the absurdity of that story, the monstrosity of that story, should be enough to indicate that there's something really wrong with the idea of getting morality from God to begin with. But the more fundamental point is this: that God, the idea of God is just this idea of this consciousness telling us what to do. Well, if it's just some consciousness telling us what to do, that's not objective. That's the definition of subjective. That's just something or somebody saying, you have to do this. And so the God version of morality is not objective. It's just subjective, and it's all the more subjective because since God doesn't really exist, nobody can, actually hear from God. There's nothing to hear from. So the whole religious structure of morality comes from people writing books, writing scripture, and making stuff up about what we ought to do. And the vast majority of it has to do with, well, we need to sacrifice, give up our values. But that's ridiculous. The reason we need morality is not to give up our values, not to sacrifice the things that we need, but to gain and keep the things that we need. So it's exactly the opposite of morality that comes from religion. Rational, secular, objective morality comes from observation and logic and anchoring moral principles in the perceptual facts of reality and the requirements of human life. And that's an important thing to learn and an important thing to spread. So read the books I mentioned and share this video, and let's try to get more people to understand where morality comes from and why it's so important for our lives and our happiness. What could be more important than that? That's it for today's episode of Reason at Large. If you have a question you'd like me to address in a future video, you can email it to me at cbiddle@theobjectivestandard.com. Thanks for tuning in, and have a wonderful day.